to a new month, or yeah, whenever it is I post this video, because I'm not sure yet, but welcome either way. I hope you've watched the video about pattern symbols. I think it's important that if you haven't watched my production playlist, I would advise you to watch the production playlist, which is in the description box, and then watch this video, because you might not understand that there are some things you should do before you reach this process. So basically this video is about the checklist you need to have when you are approaching someone to do production for you. I didn't come up with this checklist on my own. I had to do a lot of research, and also because I've done production for people, I actually realized I should have a checklist, because there are so many things you wing, and then when you're in the process of doing it, you're realizing that you should have actually just done certain things. I have been messed up before, outsourcing production and also consulting for people. So I figured that maybe there is a way we can get organized, and of course this has always been there, but I didn't check. Or you always think that you need to be manufacturing millions to have a checklist, but I think this checklist, from what I see and from the sources I got it from, it's very comprehensive, and maybe some steps you'll skip depending on which stage of production you're in. But just understand that by this stage you should already have your tech pack and your line sheets, and if you don't know what that is, please check my playlist, because I explain all that. And you should already have your collection. It's not something you're coming up with now, it's actually you're looking for someone to produce for you. You could already be producing, you're not happy with your manufacturing, you want another one, and this checklist will help you a lot. Now, this checklist is comprehensive, but I found another website and they're on another level. I think those are people who really don't want to deal with you if you don't meet all that criteria. But what I liked about that website, I've probably written it here at the bottom. What I liked about it is that they are so thorough and they explain every single term, everything. So this checklist I'm giving you is nothing compared to the one that I found. I am going to put the link in the description as well. I think it's important. I tried to think about making a video based on the content. I was like, it would be a series for a whole year. No, people need to read these things for themselves. So do check. I know that there's a lot of talk about AI and all that, but I've learned that it's very important to know it the analog way first before you rely on AI, because AI is still in the learning process and it learns from what we input as designers and people in the fashion industry and everything like that. And as someone in the fashion industry, at least the time I'm making this video, I really still don't feel like there is enough solutions for our industry. Not that there are no solutions, they are there, but of course they are very expensive. But as an African, I don't find them very accessible, and I also feel like there's still a long way to go fashion-wise, and I think it's important that even as people in Africa, we should use these platforms and to educate the AI also about our industry, what we go through, what we need and everything. Because I feel like sometimes the solutions that are made are not necessarily for us. And I'm not necessarily talking about us as African, I'm talking about us as designers. Because sometimes I'm like, how is this solution benefiting anyone? And I don't want to mention the solutions. I will make an AI video soon. I'm still researching on it, and you know how AI is, every other day there is a new thing that has been invented. Anyway, this video is about production. Let's start.
So now we start with, before you even ask for a quote, you need to start thinking about the initial contact and information gathering. So basically when you contact the factory and the information you gather. So we start with manufacturing, research and vetting. In the Kenyan context, and I'm sure it's also across Africa, not every manufacturer is structured in the same way. As I explained about my experience in my previous video, the manufacturer I worked with was open to doing freehand cutting because of the nature of our market, while other manufacturers are not. So you need to be able to understand the type of manufacturer you are working with, and you need to check their reviews. Check what people say about them. Most of the time we check reviews through references, basically anyone who's worked with them. Then you also need to check if they do work with smaller emerging brands, and or if they only work with bigger brands who are more established with the systems and everything. And then you need to check if they align with your ethical values, because you have to make sure that people are paid right, the factory is maintained well, machines are maintained well, and they keep their timelines and everything like that. So there's a lot of vetting you do. Also note that some businesses do change with time as they grow. They become more niche. Sometimes when manufacturers are starting out, they kind of offer everything because they're trying to establish themselves, and then as they grow they become more niche. So you might find that this process of vetting is something that you might keep doing over and over again, or if you're lucky and you have found a manufacturer who is already established in the niche that you need, then you could continue to use them. But here it changes a lot. And you also need to note things like how fast they are and how detail oriented they are. Just because a factory is fast doesn't mean that they're detail oriented, or vice versa. So it's really a process. Even how they communicate and everything they do, the structure, it's very important part of the vetting. Now we get into clear communication, so mostly about tech packs and specifications. So do you have a proper tech pack? So a tech pack is a set of instructions to get your designs made. It includes the exact steps and materials required to manufacture your product. In the tech pack, you need to ensure that your measurements are clear. There are different ways people take measurement depending on the complexity of the outfit as well as the factory you're working with. So these are the two examples that I've shown you. Then we start looking at the fabric type. So you need to know your GSM. Your GSM basically means grams per square meter, and it is a standard unit of measurements for fabric weight, indicating its density, thickness, and heaviness. A higher GSM means heavier, thicker, and denser fabric, like canvas, and a lower GSM means lighter, thinner, and more breathable fabric, like chiffon. You also look at the various trims, embellishments, fasteners. You have to indicate all that because it adds to the details and the functionality of the outfit. Then you have to also have your size breakdowns. If you cannot communicate your design clearly, you're not ready for manufacturing. So you have to figure all these things out. The size breakdowns basically helps you figure out how many sizes you want in quantities, as well as range, as well as quantities per size. Not all sizes sell the same. A lot of factories avoid emerging designers simply because they expect the factory to figure everything out for them, but the factory is relying on you and your data and what you know about the market you're trying to manufacture for. We are now in part 2, cost and pricing clarity, and we are going to check specifically 2 subtopics, which is quotation checklist and material sourcing. So we'll start with the quotation checklist. Your quote needs to be broken down very clearly. Of course, it depends on the size of your order, but you need to get your quote really broken down into very specific items so that you capture all the costs. You need to know your minimum order quantity. So it works in different ways. There are some people who offer very specific numbers for each item you're making. There are some small batch manufacturers who will tell you that their minimum order quantity, or MOQ, is 12 pieces per style per color, like in the example you're seeing right now. So it's same design, but the quantities is what differs. Then we have the one that maybe you have multiple designs and maybe you even pass the threshold of the MOQs. So you will find that you need to decide how many of each. So like for this example, you can see it's 30 units of a bag, scrunchie, 50 units of hoodies and some leggings, and then 100 units of the trousers, gloves, hats, like that. So you have to know how you're going to balance it, and don't forget that there's also sizes of each to consider. And as I mentioned before, there are some sizes that sell better than others, so you always have to keep in mind all those kind of details when you're thinking about your MOQs. Then you need to think about your surges, so basically costs that would go up depending on the time of the season or some unexpected expense that comes up. So generally, the list you're seeing there are usually the general costs that are there during production, not just fashion production, but sometimes there's a surge, so you have to figure out and factor in something like that could happen, and that could also affect your costs. So it's just a way of managing expectations for yourself and for the person producing for you. And there is the sample cost. So this really depends on if you give the factory a sample that you already had, or they have to create a sample for you to approve. So sample cost is there depending on the design. It's just to make sure that you agree on the design and the elements of the design. So there's usually a cost, and sometimes the sample is more expensive than a unit cost for production. So you have to keep that in mind, because that's the element of the sample that will change. So generally when you're doing a sample, you try and look for your size that's maybe in the middle of your size chart, and then you have to have a fit model to make sure that it fits the way you want. If you have the money, you could do samples for every size just to make sure there's some cohesion, but most times people just do the middle size. Then you need to discuss payment terms. So there's some factories that would want a certain percentage in advance, could be 50, could be 75. Basically the payment terms are to cover the cost of production, so that even if you delay with the balance, expenses are met. But generally you need to agree on how the payment is being done. And here in Kenya, because of the new tax laws, you need to make sure you're in line with the tax laws on how you invoice and everything like that. So you have to discuss payment terms. If you're working with a manufacturer that is abroad, because that also happens, sometimes you find like on platforms like Alibaba, they even hold the money. Like the owner of the factory can see the money has been held by the Alibaba platform, and it's only released when you receive your item. So that's usually good, at least for the risk for manufacturing out of the country. But of course it really does affect the producer. But I think if you're an established business and you're producing for people, it could still work for you, hoping that they actually accept the delivery and everything like that. But anyway, I just thought to point that out. Another thing to think about is shipping costs. So there is the shipping cost towards you as the person receiving your order. So the shipping from the manufacturer to you, whether the manufacturer is abroad or the manufacturer is local, it's shipped to you. Then there is the cost of shipping it to a shop if you have a shop, or there's a cost of shipping it to a fulfillment center if you have that, if you're selling online. And then there is also the cost of shipping to the customer after they have purchased. So shipping costs are diverse. If you want to offer free shipping, there's so many elements you have to think about, but you need to, shipping costs starts from even before you have manufactured, because it's also the shipping of your raw materials. You could have to ship it yourself, or even your manufacturer could source for you. That's also a cost for shipping. And then we have the future of price adjustments. You need to think about it, because it also affects kind of the surcharges as well. Like if there's an cover of a variable that you weren't expecting, or some non-routine expenses that crop up and all that, all those things can affect price adjustments. Of course, even laws of a country can affect. Prices of things could go up, taxes, laws on raw materials and the things you use and all that. There are very many things that could happen, so you have to also consider that, because it affects your pricing whether you like it or not. So some of the things that you have to really think about is some hidden costs, like rushed orders usually cost more. Complex construction also add to the fabric, to the construction of the outfit, makes it take longer, so it tends to become more expensive because it takes longer for it to be made. Then there is the fabric waste as well. There are very many strict rules right now, especially being implemented, about how waste fabric is used. And then there's also the number of quantities. Smaller quantities may make more sense for a new brand, easier to manage the whole process, but yeah, those are some of the things that could crop up easily. We'll look at material sourcing. So some of the things you need to consider is your suppliers. There are some things you definitely get locally, and there are some things, if you choose, you could also get internationally. And then there is also the option of your suppliers shipping in things for you. I would advise that if you're doing a very huge order and you needed to import fabric, then let your suppliers handle it, because they know how to negotiate with people, because chances are you're not the only person that they source for, or you're not the only person that they manufacture for, so they probably have a better advantage over you while sourcing. But you should also counter check that you're not being overcharged. Then of course there is the material sourcing. These are just a few pictures of what it looks like when you source for material in bulk, whether or not you got it from locally or overseas. If you order in bulk, it will probably come wrapped up in some polythene or some sack-like fabric, something waterproof, so that the fabric doesn't get any moisture, and then you can use that to basically keep your fabric in a place where it won't get dirty or contaminated or anything like that. Sometimes your supplier will arrange for you the way the fabric will be delivered to you, or they'll also suggest, but you could also handle the transport yourself. Then there is the lead time, basically just being able to figure out how long it takes for the whole process, in terms of how much time it will take to source for the material, to have your tech pack and everything else ready for production to happen, for delivery to happen, and all that. You need to really understand your lead time, and sometimes even sourcing the materials could be what delays your lead time, so you have to be very particular with understanding, and also always give some room for error or room for delays, just so that you manage your expectation. Then I will mention the storage, because you need to be able to have your fabric stored in a good, safe manner. Most of the time they are hanged in a warehouse somewhere, or a fulfillment center, in some polythene bags, where they don't get damaged in any way after you get the fabric. And especially after the process you've gone through just to have these things manufactured, it's always good to make sure that you don't drop the ball at the end. So you have to make sure that they are stored properly, correctly, and easily found, where the wrapping doesn't have to be all removed to have access to them and everything like that. Most of the time the storage is an extra fee from the manufacturer when it's being shipped to you, so those are also things you need to really consider when you are getting your items. Now we look at timeline and production realities, and we begin with the sampling stage. The sampling stage is not just about seeing the design to see how it looks like after your patterns have been cut out and made into an outfit. Usually you use toil for this stage. It's also about testing it. You test the fit, you test the construction, and you also test the production feasibility, basically even how long it will take to create one outfit. This is then closely followed by revision stage. So even with the sample, that is where all the revisions will need to be made for fit. If there's any part that needs to be adjusted, like you can see in the picture, it can be as complex as a whole fit or just a certain section. As you can see in this other picture, there is more corrections on the neckline and maybe how much fabric was used on the bottom section. Next we get into bulk production. So you need to think about the lead time of the production after everything has been approved. So it's from the sample approval to how many pieces you are basically producing. Also look at the factory workload and you see their current production schedule or bottlenecks. So bottlenecks are basically capacity constraints, slow machinery, labor shortages, and efficient workflows. Basically anything that would restrict the speed throughout the manufacturing timeline. You also need to establish communication channels for production updates. You don't wait until the production is finished so that you can be able to check on the progress. Always check on it from time to time. It can be a scheduled process, or it could also just be something you do by yourself on a regular basis, even impromptu, just to make sure that everything is working out the way you expect. Of course, if you're working with overseas production, you have to at least try and make sure there's communication online to know how the progress is going. As production proceeds, you have to ensure that there is quality control and that everything is meeting your standards. You need to have procedures. At least the factory should have procedures on how to check the quality, but you should also be able to check, even as you see in the pictures, it can consist of taking measurements to make sure sizes are the same. It's also checking the quality of the material, that it's the same throughout. And just generally, there are very, very many things you need to check when you're doing quality control checks. And you need to also check your shipping and delivery. This is different from when you are getting your materials delivered. This is basically the production company shipping things to you, so you need to figure out who's going to handle the shipping. Is it you or is it them? Who's going to pay, and how long it takes. So whether it is local or international, they usually delay sometimes, so you also have to factor that in. Also need to factor in where it will be delivered, and if there is storage you'll be paying for, how that will be handled. Legal and contractual documents are very, very important in this part of the process. It has to have been done at the very beginning. These are some of the things. Remember, this is a checklist I'm giving you, so you have to make sure your legal documents are there. It has to be a written contract. You have to figure out who owns the patents, because you could be using the manufacturer's patents and they are white labeling you and they're just creating their own designs with maybe your company colors or something. You have to ensure that your intellectual property is protected, and you have to ensure that if there is a dispute, there's a resolution in the contract. So it has to be written down, and it has to have copies, physical and also probably on email. If you don't have it written down, it doesn't exist. There will be another quality control check after production, and you have to agree with the manufacturer what happens if there is a piece that needs to be replaced, what the protocol will be. Generally, quality control happens throughout the process. It's not just once. It happens even in the middle of the cutting, the sewing and the finishing. You always have to do quality control, and that is why I'm even repeating it again here. Finally, you have to remember post-production details. Those are the tags, the labels, the sizing marks, the packaging, the branding. You have to think about all those, and that generally marks everything you need to consider when you are doing your production. Remember, this is a very, very basic list, so that is just an overview. Check the description of this video for the video I had mentioned earlier, the list, I had mentioned earlier, for a more comprehensive list.
I told you it would be a bit long, and I told you you would feel, yeah, it's a lot of things to think through, but I know it's helpful. So I really hope that if you're getting into production, just follow it so that you know your gaps, whether you're working with a manufacturer, whether you are a manufacturer, and especially in this day and age where we outsource so much of our production. Definitely have that list. I have seen people who have been cheated out of having their patterns, and your pattern is actually your intellectual property. It is actually your design. because they were working in a manufacturer, there was no contract, and they were not told that that is actually an important piece of the production you should actually own and have. It's very important to inquire about the process and everything like that. Sometimes I have offered manufacturers if I could bring my own patterns, because I make my own patterns, and some of them, their policies that they make patterns in-house and they don't want patterns from outside. It could be because they've previously been brought for patterns that didn't help or match or didn't meet the standards that they are used to. So it's always important, if it's a must, work with the pattern they have, that you make sure that it's done well. I've also worked with one who everything was done, my job was to show up, and I think I had the sample. I think I made the sample and then they did their own sample, and yeah, they changed a few things that didn't make me happy, and the production guy was also trying to change my design, and I was like, there's a reason why it's like this. Anyway, I overcame. I didn't work with them, it was for something else, so I didn't have to work with them, but yeah, so it's important. I think sometimes we're so used to delegating some of these processes so much, we don't know what to expect. So sometimes it's important to have this research. So don't forget to check the playlist if you haven't, and don't forget to check the link I had talked about at the beginning that has the full production breakdown, terms, what it does, what everything is. It can be a lot. I think they even have calculations for how many grams of fabric you should use. I don't know. I'm sure by now there is some AI tool doing it, but I always think it's important for you to know the analog way before you completely depend on AI to do everything for you. There's just a benefit of knowing, because I've also realized sometimes when I'm using AI, it changes certain aspects of things and things I won't notice and I notice. Yeah, just saying. Anyway, so I'm glad you made it to the end. I guess I'll see you next time. Bye.